This should have been banned immediately. 40 extra horsepower. 12 races. One loophole that every rival team tried to destroy today in Bahrain. And instead of shutting it down, the FIA approved it. A thermal expansion trick that turns a legal 16:1 compression ratio into 18:1 once the engine heats up. A hidden gain that could decide half a season before summer even arrives. A temporary green light that expires on the 1st of August, but not before it reshapes the championship. Red Bull is furious. Ferrari is negotiating. McLaren might have just become title favorites overnight. And if Mercedes builds a points gap before August, the second half of the season may not even matter. Because this is not just about power. It is about legality versus spirit, engineering versus politics, and whether Formula One just rewarded the boldest gray area ever exploited under the new regulations. Subscribe now, because what really happened inside that FIA meeting changes everything. Today was not a normal test day. Cars were on track. Lap times were coming in. But nobody in the paddock was really focused on sector times. They were waiting for the meeting. Behind closed doors, while mechanics adjusted front wings and engineers checked tire degradation curves, team principals gathered with the FIA to decide something far more important than setup. They had one objective: stop Mercedes. Because what Mercedes built for 2026 was not just an engine. It was a calculated interpretation of the rulebook. Under the new regulations, the compression ratio is fixed at 16:1. Measured cold. That wording matters. Measured cold. Mercedes read that line differently than everyone else. While other manufacturers designed pistons to remain stable at race temperature, Mercedes designed pistons that change. At ambient temperature, the engine passes inspection. Exactly 16:1. No violation. No argument. But once the power unit reaches operating temperature, once combustion cycles begin and internal pressures rise, those pistons expand. Not randomly. Precisely. The compression ratio increases to 18:1. 2 full points higher. And here is why that matters. Higher compression means more efficient fuel burn. More efficient burn means more energy extracted per ignition cycle. More energy means more power without increasing fuel flow. In an era obsessed with efficiency and sustainable fuels, Mercedes found performance hidden inside thermodynamics. And that is where things became uncomfortable. Because the regulations limit geometric compression measured cold. They say nothing about dynamic expansion under heat. Nothing. Red Bull saw it first during winter simulations. Ferrari confirmed it during private analysis. Whispers started circulating in the paddock weeks ago. 40 horsepower. That was the number being discussed. Not 5. Not 10. 40. On modern power units, 40 horsepower is the difference between defending on the straight and being passed before the braking zone even begins. And today, in that FIA meeting, rival teams pushed for immediate disqualification of the concept. They argued it violated the spirit of cost control. They argued it distorted competitive balance. They argued it would decide races before they even started. But the FIA had to answer one question. Is it illegal under the written regulation? Not under opinion. Not under interpretation. Under text. Technical Directive 003-26 became the turning point. The FIA confirmed that the regulation specifies compression ratio measured at ambient temperature. Mercedes complies. The dynamic expansion is not restricted. There is no explicit limit on thermal growth percentage. Which means, technically, it is legal. For now. And this is where the situation escalated. Because the FIA did not fully endorse the concept. They admitted it violates the intended philosophy of the regulation. So instead of banning it immediately, they created a window. Mercedes can run this solution until the 1st of August. After that, a new clause will cap piston expansion to 0.5%. Which effectively kills the concept. But that compromise solves one problem and creates another. If Mercedes, McLaren, and Williams had been forced to redesign the engine immediately, they would not be able to race in Bahrain next week. The FIA faced a decision. Protect regulatory purity. Or protect the show. They chose the show. And that choice just divided the season into 2 separate championships. But here is the detail nobody is talking about yet. Allowing it until August does not mean Mercedes relaxes. It means they now have 6 months to build a points gap so large that even when the engine is downgraded, the damage is irreversible. This is not about one race. This is about mathematical advantage over 12 Grands Prix. And the teams know it. That is why today in Bahrain did not feel like testing. It felt like the beginning of a political war. Because once performance advantage is legalized, even temporarily, strategy changes. Development paths change. Budget allocation changes. And championships can quietly be decided long before the summer break. But this is only the surface. Because the reaction inside each garage tells an even deeper story. Mercedes left that room calm. Not celebrating. Not smiling. Calm. Because they understand something the others fear. This advantage is not just about peak power. It solves a deeper problem. When the compression ratio increases to 18:1 at race temperature, combustion becomes more stable with the new sustainable fuel blend. That prevents knocking. It prevents cavitation inside the cylinders. If Mercedes had been forced to drop to 16:1 immediately, their entire fuel mapping would have changed overnight. Reliability would collapse. So this decision did not just preserve performance. It saved their engine from self-destruction. But here is where it gets more complex. Mercedes now faces a double development war. They must keep this high compression engine reliable for 12 races. At the same time, they must design a second power unit compliant with the August restriction. 2 parallel projects. 2 sets of simulations. 2 validation programs. Double pressure on budget. And in a cost-capped era, that matters. Every dollar spent on engine redesign is a dollar not spent on chassis upgrades. Which means the W17 might stop evolving aerodynamically sooner than expected. And this is where McLaren enters the picture. Because McLaren does not carry the same engine development burden. They receive the finished product. They focus entirely on the chassis. Today, Lando Norris topped the timing sheets. And while testing times do not mean everything, the long-run pace looked controlled. Stable. Efficient. Combine the strongest cornering platform with the most powerful engine. That is not just competitive. That is dangerous. McLaren could build a constructor points lead before August even arrives. And that possibility is what terrifies Red Bull. Christian Horner did not just argue legality. He argued competitive distortion. Because even if Red Bull builds the best aerodynamic package on the grid, straight-line speed remains king on multiple circuits in the first half of the season. Think Jeddah. Think Montreal. Think Monza. 40 horsepower on those tracks is not marginal. It is decisive. And here is something even more uncomfortable. If Mercedes builds a gap of, say, 60 or 70 points before August, then introduces a weaker engine later, they can afford to defend. They do not need to dominate Phase 2. They only need to survive it. Red Bull understands this. Ferrari understands this. Which is why Ferrari played a political game instead of a legal one. Fred Vasseur accepted the compromise. But not for free. There are strong paddock rumors that Ferrari secured flexibility around their experimental exhaust wing concept in exchange for not escalating the protest. Politics for performance. That is how modern Formula One operates. But the real silent beneficiary might not be McLaren. It might be Williams. Williams already runs a low-drag concept. Efficient on straights. Gentle on tires. Give that car an extra 40 horsepower. And suddenly midfield becomes front-runner. Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon could fight for podiums on power circuits. That shifts the entire midfield hierarchy. Racing Bulls. Haas. Sauber. They now face customer Mercedes power on a chassis that is already competitive. And what about Aston Martin? They are trapped. Honda's power unit has shown early reliability concerns. Lower peak power. If Mercedes operates at 18:1 compression while Aston runs conservative mapping to preserve components, the gap becomes brutal. Fernando Alonso may find himself defending every lap down the main straight. And this is not theoretical. This is measurable. But there is another layer nobody wants to admit. Audi. They designed their engine strictly around 16:1. No gray areas. No thermal exploitation. Now they see a rival rewarded for creative interpretation. And that sends a message. In modern Formula One, engineering brilliance is not enough. You must also read between the lines of regulation. And that realization changes manufacturer behavior long-term. Because if gray areas become temporary advantages instead of immediate bans, teams will push even harder next time. And that brings us to the real fracture. The championship is now split into 2 phases. Phase 1 is a sprint to build an irreversible advantage. Phase 2 is a survival test under new restrictions. But here is the detail that could define everything. When Mercedes introduces the compliant engine after August, it will be new. Less tested. Under pressure. If reliability fails during Phase 2, everything built in Phase 1 could collapse. So the gamble cuts both ways. Dominate now. Or risk collapse later. And as Bahrain testing continues, lap times are no longer just numbers. They are signals. Signals of who understands this political war best. Because the fight in 2026 is not just on track. It is in the interpretation of a single sentence in the rulebook. And the consequences of that sentence are only beginning to unfold. Now everything shifts to psychology. Because when a team knows it has a temporary advantage, the mindset changes. Mercedes is not thinking about November. They are thinking about accumulation. Points, margins, control. Every race before August becomes an opportunity to build insulation. Not just wins. Gaps. If they can convert that 40 horsepower into consistent podiums, consistent fastest laps, consistent front row starts, the championship math becomes brutal for everyone else. And this is where strategy becomes fascinating. Red Bull and Ferrari are not chasing domination right now. They are chasing damage limitation. Second place suddenly becomes valuable. Third place becomes survival. Because staying within reach is the only objective until Phase 2 begins. But here is where things get even more uncomfortable. If Red Bull pushes harder to compensate for the power deficit, they risk overdeveloping the car early. More aggressive aero packages. Higher rake experiments. Riskier cooling solutions. And that increases the chance of reliability issues. Which means Mercedes' temporary power advantage could force rivals into mechanical mistakes. That is how indirect dominance works. You do not just go faster. You force others to overreact. And let's talk about the drivers. Because this is not neutral inside the cockpit. Lando Norris knows this might be his window. If McLaren truly combines the best chassis with the strongest engine, the first half of the season is an opportunity that may never repeat. He does not need to win every race. He needs consistency. And if he builds a lead before August, the pressure flips to everyone else. Max Verstappen, meanwhile, faces a different challenge. If Red Bull lacks straight-line speed in Phase 1, overtaking becomes harder. Defending becomes harder. Strategy options shrink. And frustration grows. But here is the layer nobody outside the paddock fully appreciates. Fuel efficiency. An 18:1 compression ratio is not only about horsepower. It is about extracting more energy per drop of fuel. In an era where energy deployment strategies are tightly regulated, efficiency translates into flexibility. Shorter lift and coast phases. More aggressive energy harvesting. Better race pace management. Which means Mercedes' advantage may extend beyond pure straight-line speed. And that is terrifying for rivals. Because it suggests the benefit is structural, not situational. Now imagine this scenario. Mercedes builds a 70-point lead by the time the calendar reaches Belgium. August arrives. New piston expansion limit enforced. They introduce a compliant engine. Performance drops. But they only need to finish consistently in the top 4 to secure titles. Suddenly, Red Bull and Ferrari must attack aggressively in Phase 2. Aggressive strategies mean higher risk. Higher risk means more volatility. And volatility can either close the gap or widen it. But here is the real tension. The new compliant engine Mercedes introduces after August will be under immense pressure. It will have limited race validation. Limited endurance data. And if one major reliability failure happens in Phase 2, the entire gamble could collapse. That is the hidden risk of exploiting gray areas. You gain early, but you compress development timelines later. And Formula One punishes rushed engineering. So what we are witnessing is not simply a technical dispute.